wanted to welcome you. This session is on enhancing fiscal transparency. So the clear and more reliable, frequent, timely, relevant, and open that public fiscal reporting is, the better citizens can engage in fiscal policy and hold institutions accountable. Fiscal transparency can foster trust that public funds are being used effectively, that decisions are made in the public interest, and that governments are responsive to people's needs. This session will review trends in fiscal transparency and look at practical tools and approaches to strengthen it, including digital solutions and better communicating fiscal information. It will also explore how such information can be better leveraged to improve public services. The session will look at how fiscal transparency can strengthen accountability, including through the use of external audit reports by non-governmental actors. So we hope that you will engage with our expert speakers and with one another and reflect on how the actions that they share might be adapted within your own institutions or organizations. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the session, Ms. Aura Martinez Ariol. She has 15 years of experience in public financial management and has held leadership roles at the Mexican Ministry of Finance and Public Credit, Mexico City's Digital Agency for Public Innovation, the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, or GIFT, and ODI Global, and in the state and mayoral governments in Mexico City. She has extensive experience as an independent researcher and consultant working with various UN agencies, the World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank, several development agencies in Europe and America, as well as Oxfam, the Global Data Barometer, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Center for Disaster Protection, and various national and local ministries of finance in Latin America, Europe, and Africa. Our panelists include Ms. Pamela Monroe Ellis, who is Auditor General of Jamaica. She has served on the boards of the International Federation of Accountants, or IFAC, and the Intosai Development Initiative, and as chair of the International Financial Reporting for Nonprofit Organizations Steering Committee. She was also appointed Secretary General of the Caribbean Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, or CARISI. She's chaired the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, Secretariat Audit Committee, and she's a member of the ACCA Global Forum for the Public Sector. She currently serves as one of the commissioners of Jamaica's Integrity Commission and as a member of the board of the Governor General of Jamaica Trust. She is also a member of the UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration. Next, we have Mr. Vayala Quago, who's a public finance and development analyst at the Budget Foundation, where he promotes fiscal transparency and accountability in Nigeria. As the organization's country director, he has experience in analyzing public budgets, advocating for efficient governance, leveraging technology and data-driven insights to strengthen public financial management, and empowering citizens to hold governments accountable. A lawyer by training, he's currently enrolled in a PhD program in public administration. Next, if you weren't at our last session, we have Ms. Sally Torbert, the global lead for policy and research for the International Budget Partnership, IBP, who's based in Zagreb, Croatia. She provides strategic leadership to IBP's global policy and research agenda, overseeing flagship initiatives like the Open Budget Survey and multi-country research projects that generate evidence for fiscal reform and public accountability. She has previously held positions with the World Bank, DAI, UNCDF, and UNDP, supporting public finance and governance reforms in Afghanistan, Lao PDR, Nepal, Mozambique, and Timor-Leste. And we also have Mr. Satya Nugraha, who works in the Indonesian government as an internal auditor. He is deputy for the supervision of local government financial management at the Financial and Development Supervisory Agency, or BPKP. With 30 years of experience in audit, planning, and reporting systems in the government bureaucracy, he's committed to public accountability and transparency. And as a doctor of public policy, Satya also gives attention to combating corruption in the public sector. So thank you very much. And Aura, the floor is yours.
Hello. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Aura. I'm based in Mexico City, and I think it speaks a testament of how passionate am I about these topics, that it's the World Cup, and it's being held in my city. Today there will be a Mexico game in my city, and I'm here. So I hope after this session you all join me in this passion for fiscal transparency and be as committed to it, to take it to your home countries and towns and also to your daily work. Here in the fiscal realm, in the public financial management realm, is where a lot of the principles that we've discussed for these couple of days hit their most difficult phase. As we know, and it's very clear to us, our global economy is faced with low economic growth, if even, aging populations, high debt from all the recent crises, and now new spending pressures mostly related to security and defense mechanisms in many countries. So this, while it's not a very promising landscape, does face us with the reality of what will happen when we try to advance in practice all the principles that we saw have to do with this public service forum. Innovation, accountability, participation, and inclusion really are only a reality when they are reflected in the budgets. And how do we know that they are reflected on the budgets? Because we are able to analyze them, because they are available to us in specific formats. And we are way past the era from the initial fiscal transparency handbook from the IMF in 2014 that is currently being reassessed and rebuilt, where fiscal transparency was mostly around the quality and comprehensiveness of fiscal reporting, forecasting, budgeting, fiscal risk analysis, and resource revenue management. And we've come to a new reality where people are more shocked by what they don't find, but rather than what they do find. And the assumption of information not being public is an assumption, as we discussed in previous panels, of corruption, mismanagement, and at the very least, very low-skilled governance. And I want to put as a framing two reports recently published by the OECD, Restoring Public Finances, which was published in May this year, which for the first time puts the public understanding of the budget decisions as key for the public financial management. This is very new, since before we thought only technical decisions will allow us to bring more well-being to our constituencies around the world. While now we understand that if the choices that need to be made in facing all these awesome realities that I just mentioned need to be understood by the public in order for them to be effective. And this also comes with a companion report, The People and the Budget, which identifies 4 reinforcing priorities: demystifying the budget for key decision makers, communicating public finances clearly, creating meaningful opportunities for citizen engagement, and enabling independent institutions to explain fiscal conditions and long-term risks to audiences beyond the specialist community. And this brings us to the topic of public understanding. So transparency has gone beyond the existence and publicity of material to building understanding, which is an underlying condition for trust. And I think this makes an excellent framework for today's conversation, as we will consider fiscal transparency from very complementary institutional perspectives that the UNDESA has made an excellent work putting together this excellent panel of experts. We'll have the perspective of external public audit and independent oversight, a civic tech and community level monitoring experience, comparative evidence on international budget transparency, participation, and oversight practices around the world, and how to use digital systems of financial management at the local level. So all of these realities we'll see showcased in this panel, which I'm very glad I have the opportunity to host. And with that, I'll go back to Lisa to talk us a little bit about the poll, because I want to know what you think.
Thank you very much. Can we please bring up the poll, the QR code? So we're
And
just...
our panelists can answer as well if they want to.
Yes, please do. So we're just waiting for the QR code to come up, and then we will ask everyone to please scan the code with your phones. There we go. And that will bring you to a couple of poll questions. Now, the questions that you will see are which challenges to fiscal transparency you believe are most relevant in your country, and which measures you think are most effective in enhancing fiscal transparency in your country.
We'll take a couple of minutes with that because there are long-winded answers.
So, but as more answers come in, we will start to see the responses populate on the screen.
Being a soccer fan, I feel the need to narrate this match. And I will say insufficient political prioritization is leading this match. Very closely followed by 3 players, weak or outdated legal and regulatory frameworks, weak oversight and accountability mechanisms, and limited institutional capacity and coordination. So I see a lot that has to do with the state's capacity to provide these conditions for fiscal transparency. Very interesting. And in terms of the effective mechanisms for enhancing fiscal transparency, I see a lot of oversight institution funds in the game, which Pamela and Setia will be happy to address and score for. But then I see the Ministry of Finance is also taking the lead. Having worked in a Ministry of Finance, I feel very glad. Thank you. Building integrated fiscal transparency portals. I'm sure Sally is going to have an opinion about this. But also I see people that want to share the load, including line ministries in the solution. I like this. But I see a lot of changes while I speak. This match is it's heated match. Okay, I think we are good. But very similar to what other polls have shown today and in these 2 days of conversations and also networking around a bit of coffee and also wine yesterday, there is no single mechanism, especially as the answer. I like to highlight how the enhancing mechanisms are quite more diverse, and at least in this group, we are not behind the idea of a single bullet, which I think is very interesting. Sorry, can we go back? Excellent, thank you. So at least, and it's interesting that we have Ministry of Finance being the first of the the place where solutions could be found, but also we have oversight institution very close by. And I think that's important because in many countries, and as mentioned in the last session, the oversight institution's role is not always clear, and how can they be better leveraged is not always immediate for everyone. And I do think we also have found in the challenges the same thing, that there is no single challenge to be tackled. And I think it has been mentioned also in several workshops, the insufficient political prioritization, it's a big deal. So we need political will, but political will doesn't mean just saying they care, but actually prioritizing the topic. And that's very difficult in a time where we have a picture, like I mentioned, slow economic growth, high debt, and new spending pressures, which are directly in the core of Ministry of Finance work, seem to be now competing for attention with transparency decisions, which are also now, as the OECD report mentioned, a key element for public understanding and actual public financial management to be effective. So very interesting responses. I think it's good if we leave it as a background, so we can also keep reflecting on this. I see a lot of topics that will come up. We have also the topic of weak interoperability and traceability, limited institutional capacity, limited availability of open data. So we have a lot of, and I like that we have enough also fans of disinformation. Because sometimes that is not a topic that appears when we discuss fiscal transparency, and it's highly relevant, as mentioned in other spaces during the day. With that in mind, and just everyone have these topics in their minds as we go by, I'd like to go to dear Pamela for our first question. So as I mentioned, Supreme Audit institutions occupy a particularly important position in the fiscal transparency ecosystem. They examine whether public resources have been managed lawfully, more specifically, but also they can analyze if they have been used effectively. As Ms. Pamela said in her plenary addressing, they are doing now performance audits, which is also a very interesting point. And this information is to be used by key stakeholders like parliaments, public institutions, civil society, citizens. With that said, I would like to hear a little bit more, Pamela, if you might. How often are audit reports leveraged by these audiences, and especially by citizens and civil society organizations to promote accountability?
Okay, thanks, Aura. All right, so let me begin by saying that a size audit report only makes sense if our stakeholders take them up and read them. And the relationship that we have with stakeholders is not a byproduct. It's not by chance. It's by design. Our standards issued by the International Association of Supreme Audit Institutions is explicit that size need to develop a relationship with the stakeholders, and the earlier in the audit process, the better. My experience is that when the stakeholders, in particular civil society and the media, when they take up our reports and they translate the findings and the recommendations to the citizens, we get greater impact and engagement with the report. I'm going to share with you a particular experience in Jamaica with civil society that I believe has worked very well. There is a civil society organization called the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. And many years ago, the founder of that organization requested a meeting with me because at that point in time she was doing a thesis and she needed to understand how the SI operates. And out of that, we discussed the audit finding. There's one particular audit that interested her, and she needed to know whether action had been taken by the entity. And so she decided to do a study. Well, having met with me, she learned that it was not just that entity, but there were several reports that communicated malfeasance and departure from established guidance. That resulted in the civil society organization doing a research that was supported by the European Union, where they went back 6 years before to look at all the audit findings of the Auditor General's Department and the recommendations. And they followed up with, I think, about 10 or more public bodies to determine what action had been taken. That resulted in a report being done, a document being done, showing the actions or lack thereof by these state agencies to the reports. But what is more important is that it was a catalyst for something else. Out of that, they created what is called an accountometer. It can be found on a portal. You can visit it for yourself, the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. And what that accountometer does is to take all the recommendations made by the Auditor General's Department and they track it. And so citizens, other civil society organizations, and researchers can go to that portal and assess the performance of the agency by examining the findings of the Auditor General's report and the action taken by the ministry. And one of the ways that they actually do that is that we also do a follow-up to our audit reports, and this is usually discussed at our Public Accounts Committee. So they also monitor the Public Accounts Committee, and they share with the general public the discussions at the Public Accounts Committee and the outcome. I think that's a very good example of how the report of an Auditor General's Department, a Supreme Audit Institution, can be utilized, because this agency has become an advocate, and because of how consistent they are in promoting the work of the Auditor General's Department and explaining why it's important. And what they do too is that they link it to the budget. Yes, so that is one example. Now, another example probably is not so obvious, but it's real. It's another stakeholder, because a stakeholder doesn't have to be internal to the country. It can be external. It can be non-government organizations that have similar interests. And I am now thinking of the IBP. The International Budget Partners worked with the SCI community to develop a guideline for auditing the budget, and we call it budget credibility audits. This is coming from the IBP. SCI Jamaica was actually one of the members on that task force that worked on that guideline. But I can say that since then, SCI Jamaica has completed, and it has been tabled, our first budget credibility audit. And I must say that before I submitted it to Parliament, I worked with my team to package it in such a way so it would be appealing. Because my concern was that the public may not really buy into this whole thing of the budget and why it's important that the budget is credible and it is executed. But it gained, the report was tabled in Parliament, I think 3 weeks ago, and to my surprise, it gained a lot of attention, because the media was saying, see, you're complaining that the procurement guidelines are onerous, and because of that, you can't achieve the budget. But here it is. The Auditor General saying you have the budget and you're not spending it because you're not planning properly, you're not executing properly. And this is where stakeholder engagement is important, and really from both ends, from the taxpayer end, but also other organizations of similar interest, and how they can support Supreme Audit institutions.
Thank you very much, Pamela. I think I want to read that thesis and what came out of that, other than all these incredible things you're mentioning. I take from you, and I think that gives you of your contributions, and it takes a good segue to our next panelist, how you are addressing that the relationship between government or like the agencies and the stakeholders needs to be designed, and it can be shaped, and it's not an accident, it's intentional. That differs as it already, it's evidence to a new trend where you don't just, in ministries of finance and other agencies used to say, it's already in the portal. People can do anything they want with it, just have them take a look. Everyone will do it. From now, a new way of thinking our relationship with this information and the public, which is a commitment between the two, and an evolving relationship that is shaping what is happening. And with that, I think I'll turn to Bayala. So Budget IT works at the intersection of public financial data, civic tech, and citizen engagement. So this relationship for you that Pamela is outlining, it's very evident daily. And this perspective is very important because public information might be technically available at the national level or at some levels of government, but it can still remain very difficult when you go to the local level or to the specific projects and services that the citizens are using daily. With that, Budget IT has innovated, and I'd like to ask you to please describe a little bit of the ways that Budget IT is innovating to make the budget information more relevant, accessible, and understandable for citizens, including people and communities that are most disadvantaged that you work with.
Thank you so much, Aura, and thank you to the participants and my fellow panelists. So what budget does, a lot of what I said yesterday, maybe I'll just emphasize here today. The key thing is to get people interested. And because it's a lot of data, because it's very technical, it's in arcane language, there are numbers. In fact, the federal budget runs into over 2,000 pages. It can be very intimidating. So what budget does is framing that data or couching it in a way that shows people that their livelihoods, that their existence is really significantly impacted by what is going on in those numbers. So we relate it to infrastructure. With X amount of money being budgeted, it could build Y amount of hospitals. That means better medical care for you. With X amount of money, Z amount of schools could be built. That means, more schools for your children. So letting them see that these numbers mean something to them, I think is the starting point for budget. So in terms of innovation, technology has allowed information to move seamlessly, to move across borders, to move instantaneously. And it has permeated virtually every aspect of our lives. A lot of young people use cell phones. A lot of people watch YouTube. So there's some way that the digital space, overlaps with how we live, and how we operate. So budget uses the digital space as a forum for passing this information on, whether it be through a video that is like an animation of the budget process, or the parliamentary budget approval process, or it's an explainer video on that same process, or it's a part of an interview or an excerpt or a clipping from a longer form conversation, or infographics that give people, this sort of overview of how much is going to health, how much is going to education, how much is going to security, and linking that with their own personal outcomes. So it could be through a digital platform, like the one I spoke of yesterday, me.yourbudget.org, where you can literally have this information sent to you via email. You can have it sent to you weekly, monthly, and you get to see precisely how much is coming to your local government. Because, in Nigeria, the third tier of government is perhaps the most challenging, because there are difficulties in having them be fiscally autonomous, and that conversation is still ongoing. But we believe that giving people this information can stimulate their interest into asking more questions, into facing leadership with the query, okay, so this is how much you're receiving, where is the money going to, etc. I think we also focus largely on two types of vulnerable groups. For Nigeria, one is women. And quite recently, we published a report on women's economic empowerment, and we did a subnational overview of the 36 states of Nigeria, looking at the legal environment, the economic environment, education, the labor force participation, and we sort of couched that within the federal government's plan to improve women's economic participation. And we showed how much states were spending or how much they were proposing to spend in their budgets on women's issues. And it really tied into the agenda of the federal government to, improve women's participation, in the economy by 2028. Of course, using the budget as an anchor, as a way to start that conversation. Lastly, I would quickly talk about what we did with an organization called Project Enable. So Project Enable works with persons living with disabilities, and we worked on a disability inclusion report where we evaluated the 2026 federal budget to see how well it speaks to issues concerning people living with disabilities. And that report was actually published in formats suitable for persons with, audiovisual impairment issues. We also did an audiovisual version of our federal government budget reports that's suitable for persons, with those types of disabilities. So I think in the work that we do, showing people just why they should care is helping them see the relevance. Putting it in a format that is understandable, that is engaging, makes it accessible. And what was the third one? You said relevance, accessibility, and inclusion, yeah. So, yeah, basically speaks to the last 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think what you're doing is fantastic, but also speaks a lot about this point that we have here about poor accessibility and user-centered communication of fiscal information being a key challenge, and brings about how civil society can do a better translator than many governments. So you are not talking only about translating data to more understandable topics, but also of translating what does this number mean for the priorities of the people, and how do they adequately reflect their priorities of the governments. So you are enabling people to match or realize that there's not a match between their priorities and those of the governments expressed in money. With that, I'm thinking about decision translation and how does it look comparatively. I'd like to go to Sally, and she'll give us a premise since the global report for the Open Budget Survey just launched yesterday. So for all of you, this will be the first time I think Sally will be speaking publicly about this. So we're also lucky to have her here. And I will want you to please let us know a little bit of what are the trends that this latest edition of the Open Budget Survey reveal, and what are the implications of those for the efforts of strengthening fiscal transparency, but ultimately public understanding on the budgets and public and trust in the public institutions behind them.
Thank you so much, Aura. And again, thank you everyone for being here. I think Aura and I think everyone on this panel shares the deep love of this topic. So as Aura mentioned, so I work for the International Budget Partnership, and one of the research products that we produce, not every year, but every other year usually, is called the Open Budget Survey. And if you haven't heard of what the Open Budget Survey is, you might not be the first ones, but it's an independent assessment of open government practices that's comparative and is done around the world. And just to say, there's 3 pillars of it. So it assesses whether or not governments are transparent, whether or not they're engaging the public in the budget deliberations and discussions at the point that the government is making decisions around the budget. And it also assesses oversight practices, I think, like we're hearing from our panelists, both from the legislature and from the Supreme Audit Institution. I'll just give one anecdote, which is, I don't know how many of you here have actually ever read your government's budget documents. I've read a lot of them. Like, yeah, there we go. Our panelists, I know, yeah, there we go. Maybe up here we have, I know you have. But I'm wondering how many of you have. They are really long and really complicated documents. So I think the work that Budget does, and as a partner of IBP for many years, is incredibly important, because it does translate what for many people is a very obscure process into what it actually means. And for those of you who work on public services, you can't deliver public services without money. And the budget really is at the heart of making sure that every agency receives the money that it's supposed to get to do the work that you're supposed to do. But we started the Open Budget Survey and it was started 20 years ago. We're at our 20th year anniversary. Because when we started it, we actually realized that there were not that many governments that actually produce comprehensive information about what is being put into the budget and is released in a timely way throughout the year. And so it's actually done by civil society organizations. We kind of put forward the premise that civil society has the right to assess whether governments are actually communicating and engaging around the very critical decisions around what is the government doing with public money. So that said, I actually, with the global report, we analyzed the trends over the last 20 years, and I wanted to start with the good news. And the good news is that actually in the last 20 years, the question of whether or not government should be transparent has actually come immensely far. as compared to 20 years ago, actually, so 2/3 of the governments that we assess in the Open Budget Survey have actually improved transparency practices over that time period. The average score that we assessed from 0 to 100 has actually increased by over 20%. So we're actually seeing really, really positive increases on transparency in a way that I think we should be very proud of. That said, that transparency has not yet translated into the fact that people actually truly understand where public money is going. It's not translating to public trust, and I would actually argue it's not yet translating into actual accountability. And so for us, that is the big question that we're trying to face as we go forward, is we know transparency is not enough. In many cases, we know that it is absolutely sufficient and the basis for everything else, but without all the other components that are necessary for accountability, it doesn't mean anything, right? And having read a lot of budget documents, I tell you, publishing a budget document doesn't get you closer to accountability. It is publishing a PDF and then patting yourself on the back and saying that's good. So I don't know how many of you are in the Ministry of Finance or, again, read these documents, but I'm just saying, as much as I am a champion for budget transparency, I would say that that's the tip of the iceberg, and the actual meat of what it takes to turn that information into something meaningful is so much bigger. And we actually can see in the data that we have where those gaps are. And so I'll say this, and I think, Pamela, you set me up super well for this. We've heard in the last days about an implementation gap around the kind of practices or policies that governments publish intending to do good work and then really fail in implementation. There is literally the same thing on the budget. And so I can tell you from our data that actually transparency around promises, whether plans for the budget, are far better than transparency on what actually happens with the budget. So the government can trumpet all that they want around all the good things they plan to do, but do they actually account for whether or not they've done it? In many cases, they do not. I can give you examples, and I read budget documents, about actually some budget execution documents that are published in ways that you cannot compare what they spent to what they said that they'd do, right? So you actually, they don't even keep to the same accounting standards across budget documents. So this is a huge, huge gap. We have a key budget document we look at whether the government is actually accounting in the midpoint of the year whether or not they're on track to be spending what they planned. Only 41% of the 82 countries we assessed in the last round actually published that document on time. The interesting thing is that that gap in transparency, or that reduction in transparency in implementation, is actually, I would say, partially also the cause of a lack of oversight on implementation, which makes me so happy that to hear you published an audit on budget credibility. That gap between implementation and the promises is, we call that budget credibility. Because we also can see that it correlates with two other things. One is that actually, even as transparency has increased, we don't see increases in oversight practices in many countries. And actually that's stagnated in 20 years. And actually for legislative oversight, it's slightly decreased. Part of that decrease happened in COVID. A lot of legislatures gave up a lot of their authority during COVID, and it hasn't bounced back. But for example, legislatures pay a lot of attention when they have to approve the budget, but very few of them review the budget during implementation. And I have an actually scary statistic that there's actually been a decrease in the number of public accounts committees that review audit reports. In 2008, that was 47 out of 82 governments would do that. It's now down to 40. So you have a decrease in legislatures actually paying attention to the budget. Similarly, governments themselves are actually opening up deliberation around budgets only during formulation, not during implementation. So public engagement is actually not necessarily encouraged around, are you actually getting the services you receive, but only on what do you want us to spend on? And even then, that follow-up, so many governments, we heard it in the plenary panel this morning, too many governments are doing tokenistic consultations. So actually around half of the governments that we assess have some form of consultation around the budget formulation process, but only 7 out of 82 governments actually then report back what type of inputs they received and what they actually did with it. So how many people are convinced that that's actually meaningful participation? It's not. So all of this is just to say that, again, transparency is the absolute baseline of what should happen, but there's so many more practices that need to happen afterwards. I'll give some examples of good stories, but just to say, I think like many other conversations, transparency has to be seen as part of a larger system where all pieces are holding each other to account in order for it to work. Thanks, Aura.
Thank you very much, Sally. I think that is a perfect framework for also our next panelist, because you introduced the dimension of the operationalization of this landscape, of the fiscal transparency. It's really not just one thing, it's how you make the sausage happen. So in this case, most of us don't know. And the quality of transparency will ultimately define or set the baseline for meaningful participation, which in many cases it's non-existent. And this operational dimension is very much showcased by the practice that Mr. Setia is going to talk about. Your institution developed CISCEUDES, sorry if I butchered that name, an application intended to standardize budgeting, financial administration, reporting across thousands of Indonesian villages. And I think ultimately, a lot of fiscal transparency and the traceability and tracking that Sally was talking about relies on systems, on using the same classifications, the same administrative processes that make the information reliable, so that different documents don't say different things when talking about the same concept. So I would like you to please tell us a little bit more about this system, probably pronounce it correctly so everyone knows and can Google it, and what factors led to its development. So I think this is a good example, and it's going to be awarded in the ceremony in the end of the event. So it's a good example of what took us from challenges to effective mechanisms. So if you could tell us a little bit more of the history, what led for it to be needed, what was the initial need, then what led you to take this specific decision of building this system, what does it do, and how specifically does it enhance fiscal transparency in Indonesia? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aura, and hi, everybody. Nice to be with you in here. And it's just such an ice-breaking, actually. Just my country, Indonesia, currently is not joining the World Cup. That's the ice-breaking, unfortunately. Oh, well, that's I'm quite interesting for Sally said that sometimes many documents like budget documents is very complicated, and so in transparency mechanism in this topic we would like to share about how to translation the complicated one to make it simple one, and we have already make it the system. Actually, this is Indonesia village financial management system. So I mentioned first time is CISCEUDES. CIS is main system, and KEU means keuangan, which is finance, and DES means desa, which is village. So village financial management system. So before over the last decade, my country has experienced a historic decentralization flow, but from 2014, the transfer to villages only around 20 trillion, but at last year, to 2025, it reached staggering Indonesian rupiah 71 trillion. So it spread to all over village, because if one of you have already come to Indonesia, Indonesia has more than 75,000 villages. So on the other hand, there is also educational gap, because as we know that in village officials have diverse administrative, maybe around 58% or something, that they having only completed senior high school, maybe lower. So and also we have to cope with the weak oversight and limited check and balance. So that's why we are eager to make it simple with this system. And this system actually bridging the capacity gap and enhancing accountability. So the system provide data, and the data can help the village official to input the money and the budget, and also the planning, what activities that should they do. So, and also finally under reporting. So this is very good and simple. I mean, based on the system. And another benefit is they transfer data, and because this is web-based, so this is online. Before desktop-based, but now it becomes to online. And then the national data can take all data from villages, so we have single data of all villages. And happily is that all of the villages has already used this system. Only except is maybe something 5%, because there is a rural area. There are many blank spots. Have you heard about Papua, something like that? Papua in east part of Indonesia still lack of internet, so there is no bandwidth, something. So, but happily it is used and also mixed. Even though this is online system, but it is also mixed. If sometimes there is like the internet is going down, and so the village official have difficulty in inputting the data. So this application, the system help mix it by can use offline too, so they can transfer data weekly or maybe monthly. Yeah, this is challenging because anyhow we have challenges, structural policy shifts. Frequent policy shifts may require village level operators to adjust system and align with new guidelines. This is very periodically like that. And how to mitigate that matters. We proactive legal harmonization and system updates, interagency coordination and harmonization, and regular application updates. And how about the limited financial and digital literacy among village officials that I have mentioned before? So we accompany them by give them training. So we just not let them just giving the application and then they become confused. No, we accompany them so they can input and report. And about the challenge about severe connectivity disparities, like I mentioned before, it's mixed. Online is the default system, but besides online, also offline too. So if sometimes there is lack of internet, so they can use offline and then transfer the next week something or periodically. And also this redundant data entry is also our challenge. So it is why we also develop names as automatic microservice API connectors to enable background. So technically we also support like this. And I would like to give conclusion something. So actually the lesson learned is this system is designed to enhance accountability and transparency. Yes, should not be complicated. And it must be user-friendly, simple, and capable of providing real-time information. And also collaboration among stakeholders is essential. So because villages under scrutiny of Home Affairs Ministry, and also we have village ministry as well. So our institution, government internal auditor, make it like bridging both of them. So we are help in monitoring the implementation of using that village fund, and also a hybrid implementation model is an effective solution, and also last but not least, implementing an application is an effective way to strengthen accountability. However, it must be accompanied by capacity building and training program like this. I think we will roll over in discussion next, but yes, we already translate the completed one to, and thanks God, tomorrow if there is no boundaries, we will get award from United Nations. Thanks, Lisa. That's all. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for that award. I think it's very well deserved. And I think you also spoke to how to address some of the topics we saw behind us. Like right now we see at least 4 of you people thought that limited institutional capacity and coordination was a very important challenge for fiscal transparency. And I think that is like the heavier weight sometimes when it comes to publishing information and making it more available, the fact that you need several public institutions to actually talk to each other, and that's not always the case. So I think that's something that you very clearly conveyed, as well as one of the good candidates for effective mechanisms, talking about reporting program spending, outputs, and service delivery results using common classifications and identifiers. So you effectively even bridge the gap between the poles. So thank you very much for that as well, Setia. I mean, I have a number of questions, but I want to also take advantage that our audience right now is very diverse, and we'll like to take some questions now from the audience. If there is no any, I will be putting my own to the panel. But it's very rare, and just let me mention that like I've been working on this for a long time, and I work in the Ministry of Finance in Mexico, and it's very weird that you have a panel where you have someone that has written a budget, someone that has read a budget, someone that has interpreted the budget and translated to someone else, someone that has standardized a budget, and someone that has audited and corrected a budget. So all the verbs are happening, and it's very rare that you have all this expertise in the same place. I will urge you to take advantage of the panel and ask whatever questions you might have right now. Is there any hands? Everyone's so overwhelmed. Feel free to raise your hand at any time, and I will come back to you. Oh, there was someone? No? Okay. And I think, given time constraints, I'm going to go ahead and ask one question for all the panel and have you respond. So, really, we are talking about challenges and effective mechanisms to address them. I would like you to delve into those questions either by telling us, in your experience, where does the chain break? Where's the weakest link for enhancing fiscal transparency, understood in this new way as building public trust, public understanding? Because probably I like the way that the OECD put it. You need to understand, not necessarily trust. First, understanding, then we might build trust. Maybe it's too much to ask the public to trust us at the first glance. We are recently dating. Let us meet each other a bit more, and then we might find our trust, our way back to each other, in governments and different types of citizens. So for you, where's that link? And also, where have you found most better practices, or if the people in the audience or other audiences online will find one key factor that you think was enabling your success, or that you learned from these experiences that you don't want anyone to trip with again. So with that, I'll change a little bit the order and start with you, Ayala?
That's a great question and a very, very interesting one. So in our experience in budgets, there are basically two parts. The government is like the elephant in the room all the time. And what we've seen is there seems to be some level of unwillingness to provide this information. Accountability doesn't even come up most times. The transparency itself is usually very, very challenging. And of course, I mentioned yesterday that our socio-political environment, our norms, our values, have a lot to do with how people in authority perceive a duty to provide information and to be held accountable in that regard. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. We've had some success at the subnational level, and I should have even mentioned that when I was answering my first question, with our State Fiscal Transparency League ranking. So what that is, the SFTL, is essentially a ranking of the Nigerian subnationals according to predetermined metrics of fiscal transparency. So publishing of budgets, both approved and proposed, budget implementation reports. And some states were initially not really interested, but as time went on and we were publishing these reports in very colorful, interesting graphics, some of them started to call and would say, hey, we published our budget implementation report, your URL is probably broken, use this one. Or our approved budget was actually uploaded, but it was corrupted, here's the new URL. And slowly there was that development of some form of at least willingness to participate, in that publishing of the data. So the other part, the first part was a seeming government unwillingness. And I would also add, and this was a point that I think Sally had emphasized, the legislature, and she's quite right. I'm sure Nigeria was part of the evidence why, legislative participation went into decline. We don't really see it that much after budget approvals. So the monitoring, the oversight that is constitutional, which I believe is probably the principal reason why Nigeria is the way it is, generally doesn't happen. Of course, we have had, let me talk about a bright spot, we have had some significant traction with our Public Accounts Committee and their receipt of our petitions. So another innovation that we had that I should have mentioned is our Tracker Mobile. So Tracker Mobile is, Tracker is like a sister organization to Budget, is Tracker's digital application that allows citizens to take pictures of public projects, upload them, and comment on them. So Tracker would essentially give information or crawl information from the budget on various public projects in communities all across the country and tell people, like, go to the people in those communities and say, did you know that this school is being built? Did you know that this hospital is being repaired? Do you know this road is being... And citizens can engage. And when we publish, our findings from citizens' reactions online, we use the name and shame approach. We have gotten, feedback from legislators because the Nigerian budget gives like a portion of money to legislators for constituency projects. And we've seen some significant response from them. Some of them would, in shame say, oh, I'm sorry, the project was abandoned. It was an oversight. Let me quickly finish it up. And that service gets delivered. So I think I've kind of gone all over the place. So the second part of the problem, I think, stems from the citizens. And it's challenging in an environment where you are basically struggling as a citizen. I mean, the economic metrics for Nigeria aren't particularly pleasant. Inflation, wage spirals, and it's difficult for people to even be interested in fiscal information because to them, it doesn't really mean much, So that lethargy, that cynicism, that like unwillingness to really engage is a problem. And, it also stems from that poor social contract. So the parliament that is meant to be a representative of the people at the subnational level, at the federal level, doesn't seem to be willing to engage with citizens for their benefit. And it doesn't appear to us that that is helping the social contract, because if the very body that exists to represent people literally is not doing that, then you can't have, a social contract. And that further discourages citizens, so it becomes like a negative spiral. I spoke about some of the bright spots. There is a lot of willingness, of course, by the subnationals. I've seen a growing sense of commitment to being fiscally transparent, even at the federal level, in working with a lot of anti-corruption agencies, and even the Ministry of Finance now, that is, we have a new Minister of Finance, and there's some traction in his office with publishing data. Of course, harmonization is also one thing that I want to also borrow from Sally, that I think there's an interest and a drive to harmonize reporting. And it's some bright spots, mostly dark spots, but it's very gladdening to see that the work being done is getting traction, in more ways than one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you brought a lot of points, and so glad that you mentioned this public infrastructure monitoring and also the subnational level. I think this is a trend we see, that the closer we get to the information to the realities of the people are already experiencing, is the most, one of the very effective ways to communicate with them, instead of talking about these macro issues that might be disconnected from their daily lives, like bringing them home. And I like how you also frame this relationship that we started talking in Pamela's intervention, that we are shaping, as an honest one. So we need to also take accountability as citizens for our involvement in this relationship, and also take other parts of the government as accountable, like legislatives and our representatives and the electoral system. And so all of this is part of this relationship we are curating constantly, so that we have a public understanding of public finance built in fiscal transparency. And it needs to be an honest conversation, like a very big change from, as Sally was mentioning, 20 years ago, where many ministries of finance or public financial management institutions would think that of the citizens or their constituents as kids, right? That couldn't understand or wouldn't understand when something's wrong. So now we are building relationships that are more similar to a romantic relationship. We need to be honest with each other in order to grow and understand each other to build trust. So I thank you also for that consideration of all the elements that need honesty in them. With that, I'll bring the question to Setia. I'm switching the order so that I keep you guys on your toes.
Okay, thank you. It's quite interesting about transparency needs change, something like needs process. So because for the first time when the fund from the government gave to the villages official, they didn't know at that time that that money should be accountable, should be reported, etc. But by doing this system, so we try to shifting the paradigm of no accountability to accountability. So I like this question. So it means that transparency mechanism or to make the citizen becomes aware with the responsibility, accountability needs process. And this process years by year, and I have data about the village official currently. 96% of villages have publicly disclosed their village budgets through billboard or village assemble. Yeah, this change system that, and also around half, nearly 50% of villages have published their village budget information on social media, in Instagram or in many social media, and about 32% of villages have publicly disclosed their village budget on village website. They already have village websites. Before, you know that I mentioned before, their capacity, there are something like farmer or yeah, just as we noted as village people. And fortunately, because of the system, we have a one data integration of all villages. So one data means one data Indonesia. This is consolidation data. In Home Affairs and village official, we can see and we can monitor all accountability things in all villages. And besides, maybe before I give mic to Aura, it is about we also currently made another program which is CACM, maybe you know well, Pamela, continuous audit, continuous monitoring. This is monitor all the real time. And that important thing is by CACM, we also monitor the effectiveness of the using of the funds, because also the corruption or fraud potential also happen not just in the central government, also happen in village as well. So it is why with continuous audit, continuous monitoring, we also shifting the paradigm to eliminate the corruption in village. Yeah, that's thanks, Aura.
Thank you very much, and I think continuing with my romantic relationship metaphor, you bring about a very interesting point, that is that lack of understanding can also come from the government and the institutions. And the fact that they are accepting it, like that they didn't know better, maybe it's not a great excuse, but it's better than gaslighting people into thinking it's their fault. And this lack of understanding can go both ways. So it's very good that you're mentioning, and also that you bring about that it needs continued support, continue monitoring. It's not about a one-off thing. And that you are also mentioning something that also Bayala mentioned, go to the people where they act. So you don't create new, there's a cemetery of platforms and no one, or of apps that no one uses, where there is social media, and you already know that people are there, and that people are checking and having their facts put there. So I really like that you also mentioned the engagement with the people. It's through not what you think they should use, but what they actually use. So with that, I'm gonna go all the other way around to the panel, to Pamela. And please, if anyone has a question, just raise your hands and I'll take it. Oh, there's a question there. I think you'll go after Pamela. That's good?
Okay, so I go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, so first I want to congratulate Indonesia on the that application, which I was familiar with before coming, and I was quite impressed with it. And so congratulations on one, developing that application to fill the gap, and also on the upcoming award. So I'm going to take up something that Sally said. Transparency, an increase in transparency does not translate to accountability and trust. And interestingly, you said something that I actually took note of here, because I think one of the biggest gaps is understanding, the citizens' understanding. It's my view that, and I guess that's what budget does in terms of citizens empowerment. My view is that the people have the power, but they don't know it. And usually it is through understanding the process that they gain an appreciation for the power that they have. And then they take a stand, as they did in Indonesia with publishing the information. And I'm sure they published it with great pride.
Yes.
Yes. That is important, and that is where we need to focus, because there is a gap. That gap, for example, in Jamaica, when it comes on to having the necessary systems and legislations and regulations, we'll get an award. Our problem where the breakdown occurs is in implementation. But sometimes the reports are made, but the citizens don't understand why this is important. So the recent budget credibility audit that we sent to Parliament, I think one of the reasons why it got such wide acceptance and discussion is because in the audit we said we made a link to the lack of implementation to the water and sewage problem. We said because of this is contributing to the water and the sewage problem. And that is an everyday issue that people latched on, and the media ran with it. So we also have to play our part in filling that information and understanding gap. And as you can see, it's not one organization, it's an ecosystem with everyone working together. And as Aura said, we all play a different role in the public financial management system. And it really requires all of us to make it work. It's not a single actor activity.
Thank you very much, Pamela. I think you're I'm always going back to our poll questions because it's very interesting how we are been discussing basically every single point in them. You are now mentioning probably publication on non-financial data. So how to link financial data with non-financial data and how that can be done so that people understand that money also needs to mean results, not only, and concrete things, not just a number on a balance sheet. I want to take the question over there and then I'll bring it back to Sally. And if,
Sorry, me or?
there's two questions, excellent.
Okay.
So if you can introduce yourself, your country or the institution you represent, and if it's directed to specific panelists or if it's more for everyone, you also let us know.
Thank you. My name is Ken. I'm from Singapore. I'm not representing any particular organization. First, I want to thank Sally for the useful framing, transparency, accountability, and trust, right? Separate concepts, all related. My question is about calibration, right? We talk about transparency, we talk about accountability, but it's surely not a binary 0 or 1, right? Surely we're not saying we're going to have 1,000,000% accountability or 0% accountability. In this panel and the panel prior to this, we're talking about accountability in very specific ways that will be important for citizens. For example, in the last panel, we're talking about how school books, the Ministry of Education has a certain budget. How many books is a classroom supposed to get per year, per month, per day? Now, this is quite a specific and micro piece of information. So I was just thinking from the perspective of a government, I don't work for any government right now, providing such information, both in accountability as well as for transparency purposes, has an impact on them, right? There will be administrative difficulties and constraints on the government. On the flip side, for civil society or the General Office or whatever it is, will also have increased burdens in some way to be able to assess and track all these little issues, right? So my question is this: is there a suitable way to calibrate the degree to which transparency and accountability is important, and how should we think about that?
I think we take that question and then we go to the next one. Because this is a very...
It's a general question, not for any...
No, and I think it brings us very nicely to Sally's intervention. And it almost, you gave the pathway from Pamela's intervention about linking financial and non-financial data. So Sally, please take us home with this one.
No, and Ken, thank you so much. Actually, you almost stole what I was going to say. So this does actually very much connect with I think you're absolutely right. I was going to mention the cost, right? The transparency. It takes time. You need to produce a report. You need to write a report. I hear when we put out standards, we actually assess 7 key budget documents plus citizens' versions of each of those documents. You tell that to a government that has maybe 1 or 2 of those documents, and they say, well, who's going to do it? And you go, well, it should be done, but that should doesn't actually give you the people who know how to write that report, right? I would say a couple things. I think it's a really great framing in terms of, okay, well, what challenges do governments face when they're asked to be transparent? And I mean, let's be clear, a government can actually manage a budget without being transparent at all. It's possible. We have countries that score 0 on the Open Budget Survey, literally do not publish a single piece of budget information. It exists, right? And they still get money out to where it's supposed to go. They still have some form of government functioning. So it is a cost to government. It's a risk to government. And when governments start publishing information, of course, the fear is that they're putting themselves on the line, that this information could be weaponized against them. And so to some extent, the cost then is way greater than the benefit. And there is this kind of almost scary period in between when you've published budget information and when you've explained budget information, where you don't see the benefits yet, you only see the costs. And yet, I would argue, and this is, I actually empathize with governments in that space, because you are actually having to negotiate a blowback for something that you're doing a good thing, but all you're going to get is criticism to some extent, right, rather than accolades. One of the biggest challenges I think us in the fiscal space face, and this is going to go on a bit of a loop, but I'll get back there, is the fact that right now, when we're talking about trust, the biggest impact on trust, we're talking about trying to raise domestic resources to pay for services. There's some really interesting statistics. There's an Afrobarometer, that's a public opinion survey, that says that 77% of those, they surveyed a number of countries, say that they have no idea how governments use their taxes. So why are you going to pay your taxes if you don't know how government's going to use your taxes? And really, this all comes back to that question. When are people willing to pay taxes? And if people aren't willing to pay taxes, the whole social contract is broken. It is completely broken. And then to get there, to get to the point when someone says, we know why you're taxing us, we know what services we're going to get, we think you're going to use our money responsibly, and therefore this social contract works, to go from we shouldn't communicate at all because you're going to criticize us, to all the way to we have to communicate because we have to get you to trust. That's a long way to go. And starting out on that journey is scary. It really is. And so I think that's something that I think we need to give governments credit for. The impetus to start this work, it's iterative, right? So you start explaining, you start communicating better. And again, it's not just dumping information out there. It's not just producing a report to producing a report. The best reports we find explain. The best reports we find give the data that you need so that they say, we have given you enough data so you can trust us. But to get there, and again, here's the slight tangent. These days, we're looking at a situation, Aura said it in the beginning, where we're facing a level of public debt that is completely unprecedented. The IMF is now estimating that sovereign debt is going to reach 100% of global GDP by 2029. That is an insane number. That means that literally you owe as much as you're taking in. How are you supposed to pay that back? And in that context, the only thing that's going to get governments out of that fiscal hole is taxing more. But you've seen, how many times do you read in the news that governments raise taxes and these massive protests erupt? Literally, we're in this, governments have dug themselves a hole in many cases that they're only going to get out of if they actually really can show that they're good stewards of public money. And so I would say, again, going from, yes, you absorb those costs to eventually get to a good outcome, but that pathway is not an easy pathway to walk. So that would be my response to that question.
And I think it was a very good question. Thank you, Ken. And also a very good answer in the sense that governments are also people institutions. And there are heterogeneous groups of people, both in the government and the citizens, or the people in general, because also using the word citizens, many of people are not citizens. So brings also a very interesting, and I want to use this segue to tell a little story. When I worked in the Ministry of Finance, we produced the first portal at the national level in Mexico in 2014. We worked, we were very stubborn people, all female, that were trying to make this available. And we had these huge discussions with the minister, with the cabinet, everyone, all this information is gonna go out. Oh my God, the media is gonna eat us, whatever. And we didn't sleep for months. And when we actually clicked on the portal, went back home, nothing happened. We didn't know if it was sad or good. But that story brings me to they are already, and the argument we used with the minister back then to convince him at the end of the day, because we only convinced him 10 minutes before we hit the click button, or all the work we've done for months would be on the bin, until we can get another meeting with him, isn't the media already eating the government? Hitting you hard every single day? Can we at least now have the argument that what they are saying, it's incorrect because you show some correct information out there? So I don't really think that you are getting more hits than you are getting now. You're always going to be hit. And that's the relationship you have with the media. It's not because of the information. It's because of the relationship you built with the media. And it did happen, that nothing happened. The news kept being about violence, about water scarcity, about earthquakes, about the other things that are actually what people care about. And it's still not about this fiscal transparency portal. So I think that tells a lot of the story of this. Also the people in the government can be scared, but that they also can be brave. And it can lead to something happening very happily or not also very happily, because I got to keep my job. And also I like to, before we take the next question, take this that Sally mentioned, that the information available and these 20 years of that being documented by the IBP have been also enabling new conversation about taxation and who to tax. So the fiscal justice conversations that we're having, the global movements of who specifically, and the global wealth accumulation by certain individuals, and how does this look like for when it interacts with the public financial management, has also been enabled by the fact that more people are literate about these kinds of concepts, and this also has been enabled by people from the civil society and the governments and the audit institution being able to have this honest and open relationship, whether it's something sometimes not as love-like as it could be, as romantic as it could be. And with that, I'm going to take the next question over there, I think.
Hi, I'm Carolina Basante from Ecuador. I'm a journalist. Since you're talking about the media, I have a question about this, and this is an open question. It's more, I want to hear your opinion since you are experienced in your field. But what journalists and civil society can do to promote accountability when governments restrict the access to public information, and most of the time to financial information? What do you think?
I think that's an excellent question. The role of journalists and what can they do? Any takers? Pamela, go. And then we can go through the panel.
All right, so before I suggest what a journalist can do, I'll just share my observation and the moments that I have been disappointed in how the journalist carries the story relating to our audits. So Jamaica tends, it's politically tense. Yes, the country is basically split down the middle, and there is no space for independent talk. If you say if your opinion seems to favor one side or another, you're going to be labeled as supporting that side. No, certainly, as an Auditor General, I am aware of that, and I avoid using inflammatory language in the reports. I also avoid being opinionated. I report the facts, and I do that deliberately. because you can challenge me on my opinion, but you're not gonna win if you're challenging me on the facts, because the facts is there in black and white. But where it becomes challenging in the public space sometimes is how the journalists report it, because they use inflammatory language. And I recall being accused for a very long time because one of the leading newspapers wrote an article and they said the head of the organization went rogue. And everyone said the Auditor General said that he went rogue. And I never said that. But how it is brought to, and how it's published by the media at times distract from the main issues. And so there's a battle along party lines because of language use. And the real issues get lost in the fight, yes? And really, an audit report loses its value if it's not contributing to development. And that's the real purpose, yes? Yes, I know that especially for anti-corruption organization, the name and shame works. But auditors don't approach it that way. It's about lending to the overall improvement in the organization. And in fact, in my reports, I do not name the individuals. And sometimes, especially when it's sensational, people want to know, why don't you name names? Because they know who it is, but they want the Auditor General to give them the power to go to the media and say it. And I don't do that because I want the issue, the focus to be on the issue. So I think if the media appreciates that and that carrying it along a sensational line actually detracts rather than help the issue. I mean, sometimes it would help, yes? But overall, you want the public to understand the issue. And I said it yesterday, and I think I said it earlier here, that we really do rely on the media to translate the issues. One of the proposed questions wasn't asked, but it's about how you package your report so the media and the civil society and stakeholders on a whole understand it. And I could just say very quickly here that our reports are designed intentionally. I say to my audit team that after you have done this work, you need to market it. Because if nobody is reading it, it doesn't make any sense. So with the use of infographics, executive summary, at a glance, we have an at a glance section, a one page with infographics that at a snapshot is telling you what the salient issues are in the report, and the media loves that. But in addition to that, we also do PowerPoints to support the report because most people don't have the time to read a report. But you give them a PowerPoint with graphics and the issues, and they like that. And the media also likes that. So they pull from the report, they pull the graphics, it's in their story. And sometimes what people do, they understand the graphics. You show them something and instantly they can identify with what the issues are. So the Supreme Audit Institution has a responsibility to package that report in a way that its own cultural context, that it can be appreciated, but there now needs to be a partnership with the media for them to understand the sensitivities, because sometimes how it is brought by the media also puts the SAI in a bad light. And rather than understanding, and sometimes the government is not that they do not agree with the report, but they now become defensive because of how the media reports it. They don't want to challenge the media because, you know, it's never a good thing to get into the fight with the media. So they challenge the SAI.
Please go ahead.
I think I would like to emphasize what Pamela said. In our country, there is regulation that the report, audit report, that still there is crime in it, and also this about someone involved in that fraud. So it is exclude excluded from that report. So to protect the people, because if there is no regulation such to protect that, how come? And because it is still suspicious, he has not been punished yet. So to protect that, there is regulation. But I know it is not just only how to package the report, but also there is fraud, and maybe he is not fault, but just he or she is not just maybe so still in process. So we exclude from the public information. So just to add from Pamela said. Thank you for that question.
Sally or Bahala, anything? Yeah.
No, I think it's a really good question. I do think, and it actually links to my previous answer to Ken. We work with a lot of civil society that tries to get access to information that's not public, and you know, back channeling basically, and all of that is done through relationship building. And there is, I think, actually, there's a second part of my answer to Ken that I think is worth sharing. Like, for example, in Senegal, we worked with civil society organizations. We were tracking the water and sanitation budget, and we found it was underspent, and we found that actually a significant amount was underspent, but actually we couldn't figure out where or why because we didn't have access to the program level information. And that's not published, that wasn't published publicly. But the civil society went directly to the ministry and said, we don't want to attack you for this, we just want to understand why. And then built a relationship over time that knew that they weren't going to be, that we were trying to work with them, not against them. So they actually ended up getting access to the performance reports, found out that actually a lot of the problems were from a variety of issues, including interministerial coordination, including procurement systems, and actually that the procurement was taking sometimes far longer than the procurement law allowed, and so a lot of kind of infrastructure projects were being delayed because of complication in procurement. The civil society group then facilitated a dialogue between the procurement agency and the WASH directorates and said, can we fix this? But none of this was public. None of this was all done behind closed doors because, again, to build that trust, the government needed to know that this wasn't being done to go after them. This was being done, as Pamela said, to try and strengthen the systems. So there is, I'd say sometimes this competing, we call it insider-outsider strategies, right? Where we sometimes say, sometimes to fix the systems, you have to work within the systems. And sometimes to fix the systems, when the insider strategy stops working, then the media needs to start pointing fingers and shaking things, right? So to say that I do think media has a really important role. And there's been a lot of scandals that have come out in recent, hidden debt scandals and things like that need to be pointed at and saying, this is bad and this shouldn't happen again. But in our view, that only should happen in, extreme cases, right? And to a large extent, kind of trying to shame, I think, government officials that actually really are trying to do good on a usual basis almost fights against the improvement. And so there is, I think, this tension, and we're constantly trying to figure out what the right approach is. But I do think, and I guess the advice I'd have to journalists is educate yourself as much as possible about how these systems work, right? You'll do better reporting if you know. I know we're actually, one of the things we're trying to do is do actually training with investigative journalism, specifically on debt, partially because debt contracts are so complicated that even if you got access to one, trying to interpret what it is that it says is really difficult. And what we're trying to do is also avoid the knee-jerk reaction of everyone saying, oh, this debt contract is terrible or horrible, when sometimes, again, the government's trying to borrow for a really legitimate reason. So, and that's why we're trying to work with investigative journalists to say, can we help everyone understand and journalists report better about what you're seeing because you have the basis of knowledge of what these particular loan instruments are, how these contracts work, so that, again, it tries to move a bit away from sensationalism, but it also can catch the bad things if the bad things happen. So yeah, it's not a simple answer, but hopefully that does help.
Thank you very much, Sally. To this question, to close this question, I would like to also emphasize that the role of the media, also speaking truth to the power, is very important. So while it's a very delicate relationship with the information, especially financial information that they might have, it's very important to understand that the only way that you get to choose if you are going to speak truth to the power or if you are going to be an ally is if you know the information. If not, you are just stuck with one position, and most of the times it would be a position where relevant stakeholders would see you as a kid, as someone that's not understanding that it's making a fit out of something they don't get, and that relationship is very difficult to penetrate and build pathways to either getting the information, advancing or advocating for specific causes, or even speaking truth to the power in a meaningful way. So, as Hadi mentioned, educating yourself is the way I think you get to choose what kind of media you are. And if in the other side, if you don't build a knowledge base of these topics, that decision is taken from you. So you recover part of your power as media by knowing this information. But also that there's different levels of translation of this information. So there's a technical one, the ones oriented for specific causes or social agendas, and these institutions, I think, civil society organizations and academia like Budget or different academic institutions in the countries do very important work in many countries, building budget, PFM in general, public financial management literacy for media. So I would say that's also a mechanism. Working, like advocating for the need of this knowledge as media community, with civil society organizations that are already working with the data, with academics and universities that are already working with the data in a technical way, and ask them, please, like you know how to use this, I need to use them, and build these communities of practice. I want to thank the panel a lot for their insights today, for being patient with all my funny metaphors, and also our audience for being here today, and Undesa for putting this together. I think no one here, as Sally mentioned, contested the fact that fiscal transparency is a baseline. It's a requirement, and that we are all building this new love for each other and building trust through telling each other the truth, being honest, and potentially growing together into a new reality where we are very indebted with the following generations. Not only this generation is indebted, but we are right now getting all our babies, children, animals, and the planet to come a huge amount of debt. So we need to figure out a way to have people being born, not be indebted from birth. That was a privilege we had. That's a privilege we took from them. And fiscal transparency is just a part of the puzzle on how to bring back our institutions to a way that we can inherit a good world, a better world. And thank you everyone for playing your part in this, for having this ecosystem here, and thank you everyone for having me also here. And well, I don't know if there's now announcements, but with that I'll finish. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ara, and thank you to our panelists. I think that, as promised, you have really conveyed your passion for fiscal transparency and why it's important, and I think you may have even made some converts today. Thank you for the great discussion. We're grateful. For each day, and they will share just a few key messages, recommendations, summary points from the different sessions. We will start with, we have Ms. Joy Asran will be sharing her key messages from day one, covering the merit-based public service systems as a tool for good governance, as well as countering disinformation against public institutions. Thank you for my assisted delivery here. So Joy.
It's getting very late, I suppose. I prepared actually summary and then some reflections and recommendations per session. So for the first session on merit-based public service as a tool for good governance, the panel delved on how to achieve meritocracy in government, the reasons this matter in governance, the challenges in realizing it, and the approaches that can be used based on the experience of Singapore, Liberia, and Azerbaijan. Merit-based decision-making improves performance of public services, builds trust, and prevents corruption. It particularly addresses patronage decisions, favoritism, and hiring on the basis of who one knows instead of competence. So the following approaches to achieving meritocracy that address persisting challenges were shared: setting a clear set of standards on criteria and process, and making it transparent and subject to public scrutiny. Since, quote, the biggest enemy of meritocracy is opacity and vagueness. Achieving a good balance on the following, I think it came from you: opportunity and outcome, hiring new and retention, rules and discretion or flexibility, and context being a key in achieving the balance. Public-private partnership is the third approach that I listed, public-private partnership in the recruitment and training of new public servants based on merit, guided by a clear vision and with support from top political leadership. Balancing merit with inclusivity and diversity, again, I think this is your main, in mind, by including efforts to reach and enable those facing systemic marginalization, such as those in remote areas, women, people with disability. Establishing an oversight body and building a credential to win public trust and build confidence within the bureaucracy gradually over time through impact. Quote again, success breeds success. Continuous and regular building of capacity of the government and its officials in being merit-based and getting the right people to manage the process with sustainability in mind. So some of my reflections and recommendations: meritocracy in government is a key agenda to deliver effective governance, fight corruption, and win public trust. And it is achievable with approaches that address persisting challenges and deliver results over time. Support and commitment of top political leadership is key, as well as the system with clear standards that is transparent and ultimately accountable to the public. Merit needs to be balanced by inclusivity to address the prevailing inequality and asymmetry of power and resources. Those facing systemic and historical marginalization must be provided with proactive support to give them a fair chance. So this is my summary for session 1. And then session 2, it's quite long. Sorry. Session 2, countering disinformation about public institutions. The panel delves on the problem of disinformation targeting public institutions, how it is manifesting, what are the implications, and how to start fighting it. Public institutions that are targeted by disinformation are those heavily reliant on public trust to function well, such as electoral institutions, health agencies, courts, and security sector. The use of AI magnifies the problem of disinformation using social media with current AI disinformation detection tools being flawed, weak, and easily manipulated. The problem of addressing disinformation is both technical and political. How to deal with the use of technology, such as social media algorithms, AI, etc., and what system and policies should be set up to regulate the digital world without infringing on on fundamental rights. Some of the approaches shared to start fighting disinformation, targeting public institutions, media literacy, and critical thinking, particularly educating citizens about being mindful of the sources and simple ways to detect fake news, which ideally should be incorporated in the school curriculum to achieve a scale and teach the kids early on. Media literacy programs need to be aware of local contexts and use of platforms that reach the population where they are, being mindful of existing digital divide, enabling a whole-of-society approach by continuing the support for fact-checking and the monitoring efforts of media, civil society, and the academe, and enabling multi-sectoral collaboration. Radical transparency is the way to go for the government. To fight disinformation, the government needs to be quick to set the narrative based on facts. A vacuum on correct information is a fertile ground for disinformation. This needs changes in a lot of policies and processes within the government. So some of reflections and recommendations from me, obviously disinformation is a key threat to democracy because of the sheer importance of truth in everything. The challenge of stopping disinformation, targeting public institutions stems from a key fact that we are now in a new information age. The way information is created, shared, and constructed is now very different given the omnipresence of technology that engages the people at scale. And with government structures not designed to interface with it effectively. By and large, societies are still grappling with the rapid advancement in information technology. With the immensity of the problem, it could be an opportunity. I think it's a good opportunity to push governments towards, as in the panel mentioned, radical transparency that fills in all the vacuum where disinformation breeds wherein disinformation breeds through using accurate, timely, and useful information. It is also an opportunity to build consensus in societies about how to deal with digital technology, setting regulations on the basis of who has the power and who benefits most from the digital space, such as digital technology corporations and data capitalists. Given the current limitations of the government to address this information, even those targeting public institutions, reasons for this include existing laws and processes that are constraining and the lack of political commitments in many governments that are already failing to begin with. The role of civil society, media, and academia is key and must be supported. Community-based approaches should be enabled for peoples to collectively build their needed mindsets, tools, and capacities according to their context on how to navigate this new information age with renewed commitment to truth and accountability. Those are my...
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joy. That was super comprehensive. I think it really captured just a lot of what we heard yesterday. I think, and it's very valuable and useful for us also for our reporting. Thank you. So now let's move on to Mr. Kansim, who will share reflections on day 2 sessions.
Good. Well, thank you very much. You know, I have learned from my long time in public service that you must only have 3 points, otherwise people will not remember it. But I'm going to do 6 points today, okay? All right, so you bear with me, all right? 6 points. We talked about corruption in the morning, or anti-corruption, and then we talked about budget, right? Open budget in the afternoon. I've tried to summarize both into 6 key points. The first is that transparency is important, but it's not necessary it's not sufficient in of itself. We must translate transparency into accountability. Transparency meaning measures such as access to information, audit reports, budget data, all these are important, but giving citizens the right information, clear information that's accessible, meaningful to them, is important to translate that into accountability. Point 1. Point 2 is about, and this is your point, about putting citizens at the center, right? Citizens must be empowered to act, not just be informed. So in the both sessions, we talked about how citizens can be empowered to monitor, to question, to act against corruption, and that civil society, media, and using the right digital platforms can translate complex information to citizens, to make sense for citizens in their daily lives. That's point 2. Point 3 is related to the theme of our conversation, which is about trust, right? So greater accountability is necessary if you want to build greater trust in government. And we talked a little bit in at least one panel discussion about what trust really means, right? It means that citizens are willingly able to pay tax because they know that they're going to get something in return, and that corruption undermines this trust, right? So that's point 3. Accountability can breed greater trust in government. Point 4 is that there is no silver bullet to achieve both trust, accountability, and better information. We talked about at least on the anti-corruption side, enforcement, prevention, audit, institutions, legislature, civil society, independent media, civil monitoring, digital tools, AI. All these have a role to play, but not one of them working alone can solve the issue. 5th point is that reform is both a technical issue as well as a political one, right? And I think there's a point that your panel talked a lot about, right? Anti-corruption and fiscal transparency are shaped by power, by incentives and vested interests. And so having political will to change is important, but technical tools are also important. Open data, audit reports, digital platforms, etc. can also support a greater accountability and greater trust. And then there was a helpful point that I think it was Amy or Sally, I can't remember, raised about how actually both talk to each other. The technical talks to the political talks to the technical. And I think you discussed the point about how democracy can be used as a tool to shape that conversation between both parties. The last point is a more optimistic one, right? That change is possible, all right? And how do we get change? The 3 C's. First, you need courage, right? Thank you, yeah, courage. Second, you need coalitions, right? About working with people, media, civil society, governments. And the third is about cultures of integrity. And I think I liked that one, that point the best to me. That's the most inspiring one because it's moving beyond a system of rules and people checking me to me or you to a system where there's a culture, right? So culture means the language that you use, the actions that you take, and the speech that you have, right? So a culture breeds a culture of integrity rather than anti-corruption. Anti-corruption is very, very pessimistic. Cultures of integrity is very optimistic. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. They were succinct points, but they packed a punch, really. So, and yeah, I think they really wove a lot of the themes that we addressed kind of together and in a way that makes a lot of sense. So they're quite comprehensive. Thank you very, very much. We really appreciate both of you for doing that additional task. But I think it was important to kind of wrap up all the 4 sessions because they were quite discrete in a way, but then they kind of all come together under this umbrella of trust and good governance. So it was, yeah, I think quite valuable for us. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think I need this microphone anymore, but before everyone leaves, and we do conclude the workshop, but would you kindly complete the evaluation survey for the forum? It's not just for the workshop, but for the forum as a whole, and it will ask about the workshops that you attended. So at any point before you leave, yeah. Yeah, the rest of it is.